for you, but it's not going to happen today. So I'm just going to say some names, and I want you to think about these people. Oscar the Grouch, Archie Bunker, the Grinch, Ebenezer Scrooge, Grumpy the Dwarf, Weezer Boudreaux from Steel Magnolias, and the grumpy old men characters. What do they all have in common? I was going to put a picture of my husband in there too, but did not. They're a little grumpy. They're known for being grumpy. And they tell us that through their complaints, the way they go about life throughout the day. They're a little grouchy as they interact with other people. But one of the reasons these characters are so well loved to us was because, as Hollywood does well, they've allowed us to witness them getting away with an exaggerated attitude and behaviors based on their grumpiness. Their grumpiness is what makes them beloved to us. Because they were able to express their irritability in a funny or comedic way, the movies, TV shows, and stories we tell about them became favorites. However, if we were to practice their words and their actions off the screen in real life, we would be far from anybody's favorite person. Because in reality, no one likes to spend time with a complainer, a grouch, a grumpy old man. Now, studies have shown that few things are more detrimental to your health than a bad attitude. Because our attitudes begin with our mindset, if our perspective is stuck in the muck of negativity, our body, our behaviors, our mental, emotional, and even spiritual and physical health will begin to take on this posture, a posture of negativity. Now, complaining is a natural part of human communication. It is often a response to the problems we face or a way to communicate that we are dissatisfied with something. On average, most people complain for about 8 minutes and 45 seconds a day. That translates to you having 1,300 gripes every year. Now, you may have noticed at some point, as I have in myself, that you may be a little bit too much of a complainer. My toast is too crisp, or it's too soggy, or it's too cloudy today, it's too sunny tomorrow, it's too hot, it's too cold. The people who you work with are incompetent on a good day, and your family just doesn't meet up to your expectations. Think about when you look up information online about a product, a service, or a workout routine. You go through the ratings. Which are the ratings that you read? Do you read the 5-star ratings, or do you read the 1-star or half-a-star ratings where you enjoy delving into the lengthy negative commentaries provided by other complainers rather than the 5-star remarks of the smiley face compliments? Now, most people do need to express their frustrations from time to time. People need to talk to their loved ones, their safe people, about their feelings, both positive and negative. We need to seek opinions of people that we trust and admire when facing difficult choices or situations. And these actions can be positive, but it can often involve sharing stories about our problems. And sometimes that slips into excessive complaining. It's a slippery slope, especially for the Christian believer. Complaining can give birth to a spirit of ingratitude. Webster defines ingratitude as the failure or refusal to acknowledge receipt of something good from another, the forgetfulness of, or a poor return for kindness. Ingratitude is the choice to not recognize good or kindness in our life. It's the choice to take on the mindset and the spirit of grumps and grouches. Hollywood doesn't hold the corner market on grumpy characters either. The Bible is full of stories that originate from a heart of ingratitude. Many of the most disheartening stories in the Bible begin with the story of ingratitude, envy, or jealousy. So we all know the story of Cain and Abel. Both brothers offered a sacrifice to God. Cain's sacrifice was given from an ungrateful heart. Abel's sacrifice was acceptable and Cain's was not. Knowing that Cain's sacrifice was given from an ungrateful heart, God rejected his offering. And Cain's ungrateful spirit sparked a wave of anger, which convinced him that the answer to his wounded pride was not engaging in some serious personal reflection of his ungrateful sacrifice, but instead in murdering his brother. King David is another example. David lived a blessed life. The Lord gave him a flourishing kingdom. He had a successful career both in the military and as the king, and he had not one wife, but several wives. He had a healthy family, he had well-being, he had all his needs and wants provided for. However, the moment his gaze shifted from the goodness and mercies that were already in his life and allowed his heart to follow his eyes as he scanned his neighbor's rooftops, David coveted what he didn't have, and in his heart he became ungrateful for what he did have. And in turn, his ungrateful spirit led him to a greater sin, adultery and murder, and a host of other things. That initial moment of complaint and ungratefulness led both Cain and David down a slippery slope that led to grievous sins, murder and adultery. Scottish philosopher David Hume wrote, "Of all the crimes that human creatures are capable of committing, the most horrid and unnatural is ingratitude." Ingratitude begins in small ways and is often masked by other emotions, thoughts, and behaviors, making the spirit of ungratefulness difficult to identify. However, though it may be one of the least apparent sins, it drives a costly price. Let's take a look at Israel's attitude in its early days after they exited Egypt. This is from Exodus 16. I'm not sure what page that is in your pew Bibles. But after 45 days of travel, Israel's resources are beginning to run out. And with dwindling resources, their hunger and exhaustion overtook their common sense. The excitement over escaping from their enemies and their newfound sense of freedom were quickly squelched out by their physical needs. And as their bellies began to rumble, their mouths began to grumble. Exodus 16:2. And the whole congregation of people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Now, just as we struggle many times with the gravity of our physical needs going unmet, so did Israel. It's easy to get overwhelmed by negative thoughts when we are tired, sick, angry, hungry, or stressed. And overcome by their fear of hunger, Israel's focus shifted from the Lord providing to them to what they felt another person could have provided instead in Egypt. Their complaint surpassed their empty bellies to a resolve that Egypt would have cared for them better than God was in their time of need. Sure, they had food in Egypt. There was lots of food in Egypt. But they were slaves in Egypt. So what does God do about this ungratefulness? In his love and care for his children, he sends them the manna and the quail. In verse 8, Moses also says to them, "You will know that it is the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? Meaning himself and Aaron. You're not complaining about us. I'm not giving you food in the night, in the morning. You are complaining against God. So Moses takes this moment as a teaching opportunity to address their toxic attitude. He warns Israel, saying, hey, this attitude, this complaining that you're doing among yourselves, this murmuring, it's not hurting me. It's irritating to me, but it's not against me or my brother Aaron. Your words, your complaining is against God. Is this who you are? Are you a people that would grumble against the very Lord's provisions? You see, Moses understood what the Israelites and many of us today do not understand or refuse to understand, and that is we will become what we focus on. If we focus on anger, we will be angry people. If we focus on envy, we will become controlled by jealousy. If we focus on our frustration, we will transform into quarrelsome people whose argumentative nature will keep us from getting along with others. Moses knew that if the people continued focusing on their grumbling, they would become a people who were far from the Lord. So let's move forward to about 2 years after their initial grumble. Israel is still a spiritual infant, but now they have the law. They have the 10 Commandments, the guidance and instruction of the Lord. And after nearly 800 days in the desert, with the daily provision of bread and meat, Israel should have learned by now to get past that spirit of grumbling and living out a spirit of gratitude instead. But we read in verse 11, now the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord. And when he heard them, his anger was aroused. Then fire from the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. When the people cried out to Moses, he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So that place was called Taberah, because the fire from the Lord had burned among them. The rabble, what a great word. The rabble with them began to crave other food. And again the Israelites started wailing and saying, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost to ourselves, also the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. But now we've lost our appetite because we never see anything except for manna. Although the menu was always the same, Israel was living in the middle of the desert, but they were never without food. The journey of the Israelites is astounding. Their clothes never wore out. Their shoes never wore out. Their tents, the things they needed to live in, they never broke. They never wore out. In 40 years, how many things do you own that have lasted for 40 years? God provided them on a daily basis. They were never without food for 40 years, but the Israelites would accept the food of the Lord graciously, and then they would complain to each other and grumble to each other about what God was doing for them. Nothing was ever enough. Well, it's manna again. I'd rather have quail again. Isn't there a cow somewhere? Do you know anyone like that? Where nothing is never quite enough for them? How do they make you feel? Frustrated? Taken for granted? Like you'd like to burn the outside parts of their city down? Our text says that the Lord burned with anger, and he demonstrated it by burning down the camp's outskirts. To fully understand God's position in this, we need to examine grumbling. Given how long Israel remained in the desert, consider the number of stories that never got told about God's people. I am sure that Moses, who wrote their stories down, had a whole file of stories about Israel's lack of spiritual maturity. The Exodus stories tells us that there were so many arguments among the people. We read in Exodus 17 that Moses actually struggled to find time to lead the people because he was too busy dealing with their grumbling and complaining. Therefore, he had to appoint elders to oversee the social and economic issues so he could focus on getting them through the desert and to the promised land. Moses had a lot of stories to tell, but he deliberately chose to leave them out of the writing of the Exodus story. However, in the few stories he does record twice, Moses highlights the grumbling nature of the Israelites. This sly grumble, which is often justified by its beholders, they're wandering in a desert, for heaven's sakes. Who wouldn't be a little bit unhappy? It was destroying God's new nation. And Moses understood that it had the potential also to destroy God's people in the future. Why? Because he knows, as we can also read in the New Testament epistle of James, the brother of Jesus, that an attitude of ingratitude leads to sin that will eventually pull us away from the Lord or cause us to no longer trust him. You can read in James 1, verse 14, but each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Well, what is grumbling? And why is complaining so detrimental to our faith? Grumbling, most importantly, is the complete opposite of gratitude. But most importantly, to grumble and complain is to reject the grace of God that he's so freely given to us. Israel's complaining surpassed their unmet needs. Their murmuring was a faithless act that insinuated that God's provisions for them weren't good enough. Choosing to be ungrateful for their daily drop from the sky and raise from the ground meals that they had to do nothing for, and their desire to go back to slavery in Egypt to be fed there instead was to completely reject God's provision of grace and his offer of salvation, because Israel's salvation was dependent upon them being able to trust in the Lord. Grumbling may not seem like such a big deal. We've already said that everyone complains at times. It's natural. And life can get hard, very hard. It is natural on occasion to question its path and to question its fairness. But when we become completely focused on the negativity of any situation, we find ourselves sliding down that slippery slope to the sins of ungratefulness, of discontent, of fussiness, of gossip, negativity, intolerance, impatient, uncompromising, and unyielding mindsets and behaviors. Grumbling has the power to pull the strongest of believers, those who were once in awe of the greatness of their salvation, far, far away from God and into the grips of darkness. In essence, grumbling gives us a free pass to shift our focus from faith in what God provides to the problems of our life. It takes our problem at hand and it turns it into a spiritual issue of the heart, which inevitably eats away at our ability to recognize the greatness of God's grace in our life. Israel imagined they would be better off dying as oppressed slaves in Egypt than to die as God's free people, cared for him in the desert. Although it was apparent by his provision that God would never allow them to die of starvation in the desert, Israelites still would have chosen death by slavery owner over what they illogically perceived as death by starvation in following God in the desert. Grumbling has the power to bring us to this place. Ingratitude moves us backward in our thinking and ultimately backward in how we live. Are you wondering right now, do I complain too much? Do I look at my life and say, this isn't enough? Or am I living in a state in, I want, I wish, I had, I miss? Do I look at others' lives longingly and wish I had their experience, their possessions, their spouse, their children, their house, their job, their friends? What can we do to either stop complaining and being ungrateful or to protect ourselves from sliding down that slippery slope? One, we can simplify things. We live in a world where more is better. And the more you have, the better you are. But sometimes more is too much. Because when there's too much, it's hard to focus. It's hard to care. I was cleaning upstairs this weekend because we have some company coming soon, and I came across this beautiful wooden platter thing, and I was like, that's awesome. Where'd that come from? I would have never found it because it's buried under all of these other things that I also never use, right? Having too much keeps me from focusing on the things that would really bring me joy. More isn't always better. And it's easy for gratitude and thankfulness to get lost in the chaos of more. It's hard to focus on that one thing. My friend has 4 kiddos, and she likes to take them places and do things with them. They recently went on vacation to Tennessee, and they did all the things. They went to Anakeesta, they went to Dollywood, they went to some giant water park. She said, do you know what the favorite thing was, they said, of all these things? It was the hotel pool. There was too much to choose from. They couldn't focus on an experience to be grateful for. Too much is too easy for ingratitude to slip in. The second thing we can do is stop comparing yourself to others or competing with other people. Comparison and competition will destroy contentment. And if you aren't content, you will complain. Consider the story of Jesus and Peter that we read in John 21. This takes place immediately after Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, has restored Peter to relationship with himself. Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at supper and had said, Lord, who is going to betray you? And when Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? And Jesus answered, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You follow me. Jesus doesn't mince words ever. And it's just a bit comical that he is very quite clearly saying, Peter, stay in your own lane. The story I'm writing for him doesn't star you. You're not a part of it. Mind your own business. Because I'm writing a different story for you, and you need to be the star of your own show. But how many times do we look at someone else's life and think it's better, or it's more, or it's perceived in a better light than what our life is? How many times do we want what they have instead of being grateful for what we have? You know, here's the thing. Recently, I went to get my hair cut. Do you all know Robin Lucas, right? I love her hair. So again, I want my hair cut like Robin Lucas's. Well, she cut my hair like Robin Lucas's, but I don't look like Robin Lucas. Do you know why? Because I'm not Robin Lucas. And what is working for her isn't going to work for me. We often look at other people's spouses and children and think, oh man, if only mine can be that way. I'm going to tell you what, you end up with that spouse, it's not going to work. They're not meant to be you. You got to take care of their kids for a couple of days, you're going to be asking for your kids back real quick. Because that's not God's plan for you. That's not the story He's written for you. He's got a great plan for you, but you got to stay in your own lane. to get the good stuff. The final thing we can do, which is also hard, is to actively practice thankfulness. How would your life change if instead of complaining for 8 minutes a day, you were actively involved in just 8 minutes of thankfulness every day? Now, it's not always easy to be thankful in each moment. It's hard. Being human is hard, and sometimes our lives are unbearable. And we learned last week that through God's grace, we are given the grace to give grace. We always have Jesus. It doesn't matter how much money's in your bank account. It doesn't matter if your health is failing. It doesn't matter if your marriage is failing or your children won't talk to you. Our gratitude can always be that we belong to Jesus and far better things await us in the future. Remember, what your focus is what you will be. Focus on one thing to be grateful for, and that one thing can always be Jesus. And no one can ever take that away from you. So ask yourself, how can you move the needle forward this week in your life? Does it include a practice of gratitude? And how do people see you? Are you a grouch? Are you grumpy? Are you known for it? Do they give you little placards? Send you little quips about your grouchiness? Or could you be like one of these people? You're supposed to get a PowerPoint here. Pollyanna. Elmo, the red dinosaur from he's not a dinosaur. Elmo, the red monster from Sesame Street. Happy, the dwarf. Forrest Gump. Mr. Rogers. Or Ted Lasso. People who are known, they are legends for their positive outlook, for looking at what they have, being thankful for it, and taking what they have and paying it forward in service to others. We have so much to be thankful for. If only we can stop our grumbling long enough to recognize it. We're getting ready to sing this final hymn, which is a favorite of mine. We don't sing it very often. It is Count Your Blessings. It's number 786 in your hymnal. This is a song that my grandma used to sing quite frequently when she was sewing. And I was always, I've shared this story with you before, a little befuddled by her singing this song because she had a hard, hard life. And I do remember once I asked her, Grandma, why do you sing this song all the time? She said, because even if you have nothing else left, you will always have Jesus. So count your blessings. Stand as you are able, please, and join us for number 786.